Hello and welcome to FFRF's Ask an Atheist. I'm Chris Line, a staff attorney at the Freedom from Religion Foundation, coming to you live from the Stephen Uhl Friendly Atheist Studio in Freethought Hall, FFRF's headquarters in Madison, Wisconsin. This week we'll be discussing Christian nationalism in the state of Idaho, and joining me today is FFRF State Policy Manager Ryan Dudley, and via Skype we've got Josiah Mannion, a photographer and activist located in Idaho. He's been involved in combating Christian nationalism in the area, and he'll talk with us about that. Thanks for joining me today, guys.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
As always, we want to know what your questions are on this topic. You can ask them in the comments or send an email to askanatheist@ffrf.org.
And remember, FFRF is a 501c3 nonpartisan organization, so we do not and cannot take sides in partisan elections, and we do not endorse any such views that might be expressed here.
So I'll just say for starters, I met Josiah back in 2016 when I was just an intern at FFRF. They actually sent me to the Reason Rally in DC, and my coworker at the time, Andrew Seidel, managed to get us both on the photography team there. And Josiah was a photographer there, and I was a photographer there, even though I was very inexperienced at the time. I got to work with all these amazing people you see on the screen. Bruce Press organized the photography team, and we were able to put together all the photos of the event. And so it's great to talk to you again, Josiah, and thank you for joining us here on Freethought, or on Ask an Atheist.
Good to see you too, Chris.
So as I said, today we're going to be talking about Christian nationalism, and specifically in Idaho. The idea that the United States is based on Christianity, and therefore that Christianity should direct all of its policies, has been a fringe belief for many decades. But the rise of far-right extremism has paved the way for the concept to become mainstream. Top-level politicians are now echoing this ideology. "We need to be the party of nationalism," Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene has proclaimed. "I'm a Christian, and I say proudly, we should be Christian nationalists." Christian nationalism is based on the idea that we need to bring the U.S. back to a time when Christianity was the basis of government. But that time never existed. The Founding Fathers wanted to keep a separation between the church and the government because they understood the tyranny and oppression that often results when they mix. We are not a Christian nation. Christian nationalism has been cropping up everywhere across the country. The trend's not specific to any party or location, as is evident by New York City Mayor Eric Adams' recent comments. He said, "Don't tell me about no separation of church and state," and went on to say, "And so today we proclaim this city, New York City, as a place where the mayor of New York is the servant of God." However, despite the fact that this is widespread, Josiah could maybe attest to the fact that Idaho in particular offers a startling view of what a right-wing vision of Christian America might look like. How are things there? Does it seem a little bit worse in Idaho versus the rest of the world from your local perspective?
I hesitate to call it worse in terms of a comparison, but it has a unique atmosphere that comes from particularly North Idaho's history as a part of the American Redoubt, and a gathering of Nazism that went away in the name of, or as a name of Nazis. It went away in Hayden, which is it's the local areas like Coeur d'Alene, Hayden, Post Falls. Mm-hmm. So it theoretically went away, but it just went into the woods. Where they now have, a push for people escaping the, liberal California, et cetera, mm-hmm. To come and buy property and create communes, which is really just exactly what happened in Hayden under a different name.
Yeah, we've seen that. That's what I've heard, that a lot of people from California, the Washington State area, who want to escape these sort of liberal policies, as they say, like taking COVID seriously and things like that, made a move to Idaho. Ryan, you cover Idaho in terms of our state level advocacy. What do you think? You cover the whole West Coast. Does Idaho seem worse to you? Is it about the same as others, or how would you kind of place it?
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't say it's worse. It is certainly, there's some bad ones out there, right? Mm-hmm. I guess Idaho would be in the top the West as far as bad bills, as far as Christian nationalist bills, and they just feel empowered by, I do think, all these people moving to Idaho.
Yeah, I believe, I mean, I don't have the stats of it, but I assume Idaho's got a pretty small population anyway, so you bring in an influx of people with a particular viewpoint, it's probably pretty easy for them to take over in the legislature, you know.
Yeah.
Much more so than other areas. We've got people who push for Christian nationalists to take over the legislature, but there's just a wider variety of people that can prevent that from happening, a larger population. But when you have these small populations in like Idaho, maybe Montana, around that area, it's probably easier to congregate this sort of stuff.
Yeah, and I guess, you know, maybe I should backtrack on saying it's not worse. Now that I'm thinking about it and all these bills that I am seeing, I'm like, yeah, it is pretty bad. It is bad. And we're starting to see the effects of it too. There was just a report the other day or an article that said that a hospital in northern Idaho is no longer going to be able to provide to deliver babies effectively because the abortion ban's there. And we're starting to see these really bad, dare I say, theocratic laws, you know, take effect. So yeah, it's certainly bad there.
Yeah, and you may recall, we could talk about a few specific instances. For example, last June, after an alarmed 911 caller reported a group dressed like a little army getting into a moving truck, police in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, arrested 31 men believed to be linked to Patriot Front, a white supremacist group, alleging they were planning to riot at a Pride at the Park event. We have a clip about that.
In light of Saturday's incident in Coeur d'Alene, officials with one Idaho anti-extremism organization are noting there have long been extremist groups in Idaho, but they say that the dynamics have recently changed. According to the Idaho 97 Project, the state's recent population influx has exacerbated Idaho's existing issues with extremism. They say historically, Idaho has been the home to a live and let live style of conservatism, but recently, there have been more activism among groups associated with right nationalism and Christian nationalism. Oftentimes, these demonstrations include individuals who are not native Idahoans.
So I'd hope, Josiah, that is sort of a one-off kind of thing. I mean, presumably there's not a lot of this sort of armed army type terrifying stuff happening all the time, right? Maybe that was possibly a one-off, or do you see a lot of things like that, do you think, in that area?
Yes. I mean, I grew up in Texas, so I thought I knew guns rights activists. Nothing like it until I came to North Idaho. 2A is a religion unto itself here.
Okay, yeah.
So there are, on a fairly regular basis, as a form of protective protests, particularly during when Black Lives Matter protests were particularly active, they would just show up downtown and wander around with rifles. And at that Pride event, there were folks not necessarily directly associated with, but certainly with connections to the U-Haul group, who were wandering around Pride, wearing their M16s or knockoff M16s or whatever. Around Pride, and the policy was just to be very non-confrontational, not to let them visibly shake anybody, and fortunately, you know, parents and kids and everybody did a fantastic job just ignoring them, basically.
Good. Yeah.
But they were there, you know, and they were out with their cell phones. There was some fallout from that about a drag performance, which has now been directly connected to the anti-drag bills that are coming through in Idaho, and yeah, all of that stuff is connected. So guns are very, very prevalent here, and even people who push for more liberal legislation tend to step lightly around gun control.
Yeah, and that's terrifying, the combination of Christian nationalism and wanting to impose certain views onto people, while also wanting to be heavily armed. And we're glad that they were arrested before any sort of incident took place, or, you know, anyone was put in danger. But just a few months after those Patriot Front members were arrested, the Reawaken America tour, an unabashed Christian nationalist traveling exhibition that mixes right-wing politics, conspiracy theories, and antipathy toward COVID-19 restrictions, hosted one of its rallies in Post Falls, just a short drive from Coeur d'Alene. And we've got a clip about that event.
The Reawaken America tour is bringing in thousands of people to State Line Speedway, but local religious leaders say they might be sending the wrong kind of message about Christianity.
COVID is treatable, the vaccine is evil, or the jab is evil, and they need Jesus.
That is one of the messages being spread in Post Falls this weekend, and it has some local churches concerned.
But when we heard that Reawaken America was coming to Post Falls, a lot of us started talking about the challenges that presented to us as members of the Christian faith and as us as citizens of the United States.
The political tour has conservative Christian speakers who say they are educating attendees about problems that they see happening in our country.
To educate people on the idea of what's happening in the country today is to be unapologetic about who we are as a faith-based nation, what we believe in terms of our, the sort of the spiritual and intellectual, war that we're involved in. I mean, this is it's a great opportunity for us to come around and just meet people and talk to people.
So I know that there's an emphasis that they're looking at that we should be one religion under one nation, and I don't agree with that.
Speakers at this rally spoke about rejecting the COVID-19 vaccine, said the last election was fraud, and also had Christian speakers throughout.
I would urge anybody who thinks that Christian nationalism is Christianity to go back and read the Gospels. Read the words of Jesus himself, because the words used by Christian nationalists are words of demonization, of division, of violence.
Yeah, as you can see there, we've got, luckily, even, some Christians fighting back. And we've had this whole thing, as Christian nationalism has been coming up and pushing these bad things, we've seen more and more Christians come out and try to even fight against that, Because I think even Christians should and can recognize that infusing government and Christianity is bad for both. It hurts religion and it hurts government. We should have freedom to have our views, to express our religion, but religion and the government are not supposed to be entwined. That's why we fight for the separation of church and state, and that's important. And you see there at this sort of Christian event that the big topics they're covering are the very popular Christian topics of COVID vaccines and election results and things like that, all the important stuff. I don't know, do you see a lot of stuff like that? Is that pretty representative of the type of stuff we're seeing in Idaho, Josiah?
Yes. Yeah. I can fairly unequivocally say those sentiments are not uncommon.
Yeah, that was kind of my hope. This was one-off, like a one-off situation, but that you're telling us that's certainly not the case, huh?
Oh, no. That's fairly consistent. I mean, that goes hand in hand. There's the particular conservative Republican political group that attempts to dominate local politics is called KCRCC. Everybody knows them, whether they take their word or not. Brent Regan, who's in charge of or not in charge. No, I guess kind of more or less in charge. He's their guru. And he's the one who is coordinating or helping to coordinate all of the attacks on all of North Idaho's public institutions, whether it's the public library, whether it's the North Idaho College, the public college, or public schools, attempting to defund public schools.
Yeah, that sounds terrifying. And we've seen something similar. So just nearby, you said like an hour away, for the past 30 years, believers from across the United States have been gathering in Moscow, a city in northern Idaho. These people believe that biblical law should apply to today's world, and they look at the Bible to understand how they believe American institutions should be reformed. Their goal is simple. They want to convert the people of Moscow to their way of thinking as a first step of converting the world. In that area, as you kind of said in your area, church leaders have bullied elected officials over COVID restrictions and harassed their perceived opponents in pursuit of their long-term goal of transforming America into a nation ruled according to their own Christian moral precepts. The big figurehead in Moscow, a leader of a church, and this movement was profiled on Meet the Press. And we've got a couple of clips that kind of just show what they're all about.
In northern Idaho's dunes of grains and grass, a battle without bullets over the direction of a town.
I believe that what's happening in Moscow is a microcosm of what's happening all across the country that started here maybe 10 or 15 years earlier than what's happening across the country.
Pastor Doug Wilson leads Christ Church in what he calls a Cold War civil war.
Our rights come to us from God and not from the government.
Fighting in, of all places, a college town. Moscow, home to University of Idaho and just 8 miles from Washington State University, exudes a live and let live vibe. From this former art house movie theater, Wilson leads his campaign to make Moscow a Christian town.
Idaho is a very red state. Moscow was historically a very blue dot in this red state. And so consequently, the fact that we've done this has been disruptive in the minds of some, but the feasibility of evangelizing in Moscow had to do with the importance of the university and the size of the town.
So in your version of a Christian town, would there be a place for non-believers?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Would there be a place for same-sex couples?
What, you mean legally?
Yes.
You mean like marriage?
Mm-hmm.
No marriage. But there'd be same-sex couples.
No marriage, even though it's the law of the land in the United States?
Just like Roe used to be.
Yeah, sort of a terrifying view of what could be happening if these type of people get in power more across the country. And I mean, not that they're not already, but you see, he mentioned there how Roe used to be the law, and now that has been struck down, and they're able to influence their agenda, talking about the end of gay marriage, obviously. But at least he was nice enough to say that the non-religious can still exist in that town.
Oh, I appreciate
That's
it.
good, you know.
Thanks for letting us hang out a little bit, right?
Yeah, no.
They just can't say it. That's
Right,
all.
yeah. Keep it under wraps. But and I'm fascinated that this movement is taking place in Moscow. Obviously a college town, a hotbed of where ideas go to grow in theory, right? And that's just really interesting to me that he has the empowerment he feels to do that.
Right, yeah, he spoke, I mean, you saw in the clip, he spoke very, very confidently.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that was not someone wish casting what they want to do, but kind of explaining, this is what we've done, this is what we're going to do, and it's just frankly terrifying. And as I said, this has happened over decades. This wasn't like last year they came in, and that's the thing we've been seeing building. Christian nationalism builds up. You know, it's little things that go a long way, starting with, many decades ago when we started putting "in God we trust" on everything. You know, they claimed that was ceremonial deism. Oh, it's just, we're going to make it the national motto. It's not, don't worry, this isn't Christianity. And now, decades later, we see the fruit of that as they point to that and say, oh, look, in God we trust, like this, and use that to justify the lies that this is a Christian nation, that we were founded on Christianity, when the exact opposite was true. Many of our founders were Christian, many were deists, but they understood and they made a country knowing that, hey, if we allow one religion to be infused in the government, there isn't going to be religious freedom. I mean, that's part of the reason why people came to America in the first place, is fear of governmental and tyrannical religion. And you prevent that by keeping the government separate from religion, allowing people to have their views, but not letting those views take over and not imposing those views onto others. We live in a joint community, and we should all be free to share our beliefs and not have something like Moscow where, gay marriage will not be allowed, but luckily the non-religious will be allowed to exist, presumably so that they can convert us. Or, I guess, allowing us as long as we go along. I think that's another big thing. It's not always about conversion. A lot of it is, as long as you follow the rules, you can have your other beliefs, but we really should be more neutral. You have any thoughts, Josiah, from a local perspective about Moscow? Is that something you hear about in your area? You said it was about an hour away.
It's like an hour and a half away, I think.
Yeah, are you, have you been aware of this? Is this something that comes up in your following?
I'm trying to remember the name of the book. It was a really good book. It was actually done by a professor of religion in England, one of the Oxford, Cambridge guys.
Yeah.
that explored that whole issue of the redoubt. And while there were points in the book in which he was kind of sympathetic to them, he outlined very accurately that movement of the American redoubt and how it was connected to racial purity projects, and then from there you can connect it to Mothers of Mass Resistance and all of that stuff. But that pastor Doug Wilson is very, very well known here, and he's right that they started this project with very, very pragmatic steps: buying property, investing money, creating their own communities alongside the liberal communities, and dealing with the friction that comes from that. But that there are some internal divisions in that project about the role of the different brands of millenarian theology, whether their job is to transform the entirety of American society or be hunkering down and waiting for the apocalypse so that they can rebuild a Christian America out of the apocalypse.
Interesting. Yeah, neither sounds good. Both options sound very scary to me, whether you've got this pocket of people preparing for the end of the world or trying to dominate the world. Neither sounds good. It's important.
The power that it gives them is that, to a certain extent, they focus on local politics. So they will focus on taking over a school board, a library board of trustees, and so on. Mm-hmm. But now they have, of course, gotten connected to nationally coordinated, Gish Gallop of bills. Mm-hmm. So they've gotten connected to that and are provided funding with that. But you do begin to see some internal fractures within their own communities about whether they should be creating their own small communities and ignoring national politics, or whether they should be a part of national politics.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point. That it is important that we also fight back on the local level, that we go ahead and make sure that our people, we're getting people to do the same thing, because at the local level, it's not that hard to get a school board member elected. You just don't need that many people as a part of your movement to win some of these local level elections. So it's really important that secular people out there are also joining their school boards, are making sure they're involved in these local politics, so that people with Christian nationalist views aren't able to come in. Because the problem is, you don't want to see them till they're there. Mm-hmm. You might be able to attest they come in being a little, they're not as extreme when they want to be voted in. Then they get in, and then that's when they start, banning books, doing all these things that are not good for people. And by the time they're in, it's too late.
Yeah.
We deal with that a lot in Colorado. We've got a lot of really bad school board members. We just can't really do anything about it, because the mechanism to fix it is for people to vote them out.
Yeah, that's exactly the point I was going to make. It kind of speaks to your earlier point of, this isn't something that they woke up yesterday and decided to do. This has been a movement that's happened forever, for a long time at least, and they have sought out these smaller positions where a lot of times people are more apathetic to the school board positions. It doesn't matter to me. It doesn't matter. My kid's not in school. But again, to your point of, that's when they start banning books. That's when they start laying the groundwork for this Christian nationalist movement.
Yeah, it's important that we keep a close eye on this movement in Moscow, because they clearly want to spread Christian nationalism far and wide, as a final clip from the Meet the Press interview warns.
Wilson, if anything, seems energized by the criticism and attention, and undeterred from his goal.
Do you see expanding this microcosm from Moscow to the full United States?
It's hard to envision how that might happen. I think it would be wonderful if it did. So if there were a reformation and a revival, that's something we pray for regularly. And if what is happening here caught fire and spread elsewhere, I would be very, very grateful.
We would not. So hopefully we're able to keep that fire contained, maybe dig some trenches so the fire can't keep spreading. But Josiah, you've seen these things up close and personal. Why don't you tell us about what happened at that chaotic Community Library Network board meeting that took place in Post Falls in February, why you were there, what you spoke about. We have a clip, but we'll go ahead and let you introduce it a little bit first before we show that.
Okay, so in November, a couple of local moms who themselves are homeschoolers organized to help defend public libraries against attempt to ban all queer and racial content, basically anything queer, especially transgender stuff, especially if it portrayed transgender people of color, anything besides white. They want all of those pushed out of public institutions. And in fact, what they really want is for those public institutions not to be representative of the public, but of a very, very narrow version of what Christianity is. And you saw that Reverend Gretchen, who I think is now retired, but she has been a vocal force against that, present at Pride parades and all of that stuff. But anyway, these two moms started organizing a group. It's now called Community Library Network Alliance, to try and defend against the banning of books and the social control of books. In part, it's because they use the public library as resources to teach their children, and they don't want those public resources to be controlled by a very narrow vision of one particular religion. So not even just Christianity in general, but a very narrow vision of what Christianity is. And so they started doing that and showing up at Board of Trustees meetings where KCRCC controlled groups were pushing for books from even fairly popular authors like Sarah J. Maas to be banned from public libraries or restricted because they contain sexual content. And somehow or another, I got involved with that group, talking and planning, and
then you ended up speaking at a meeting.
Do what?
You ended up speaking at a meeting then in February as a representative?
Speaking at a meeting, and had not been entirely sure whether or not I was really going to sign up or not. It was there, in my traditional role, that I was going to take pictures. But I had gotten there early, just because of the way things worked out, and started typing, and came up with something that had organized my thoughts. The previous meeting, I had committed to speaking, but it kind of spoke off the cuff, and which is, I do okay with that, but but not really. I need to be able to organize my thoughts. So I typed some stuff out, and then when my turn came, then I guess you'll see what happened.
Yeah, all hell broke loose. We'll go ahead and show you a clip of what happened when you were speaking.
All right, I'm going to be a little blunt now. Those leading this attack on the libraries, both locally and nationally, can be directly linked to patriarchal white Christian nationalism.
Shut the fuck up. Okay, that's enough. Everybody else, hang on one sec. Everybody else has been allowed to say what they need to say and read what they need to read. Let this man speak.
And do we really want that back in Hagen? Haven't we had enough of that violently exclusionary ideology 30 years ago? Because when you get right down to it, that's what these folks would like. They'd like anyone that deviates from their idea of normative to take their place a little lower on the hierarchical chain of being, a little less than fully human, where normatively human means white, heterosexual, patriarchal, according to one and only one idea.
Okay, I'm going to stop
gender.
you again. Hang on for the time. We have allowed people to read absolutely awful passages from
that
books.
You give to children.
That's enough.
You give that to kids.
Stuff out of your book.
Okay to give to kids.
We are listening We are listening to you. Can you please give him the courtesy to listen to him? We have listened carefully to everybody. Please let him speak.
If you can't listen to that, why are you giving it to kids?
He's a racist. I am only asking you one thing. Please give this man the opportunity to speak that everybody else has received.
Everybody listen to the racist. Give him his moment. Shut up, Charity. Shut up.
You're the one that's home for 6 minutes. You guys, enough. Okay.
And most definitely Christian, and even a very narrow band of understandings of what Christian can mean. Never mind other religions or no religion at all.
Yeah. So my understanding is that the police did end up coming to this meeting.
Yes. Someone notified the police that things had the potential to get out of control. I think they just messaged them, and a couple of officers very quietly came in and were standing off to the side. You couldn't see them in that clip, but they were already there.
Mm-hmm. Well, you could see they alluded, the woman leading kind of alluded to some of the other comments being made on the other side. I think we have just a short clip of kind of an example of what kind of stuff they were saying.
Okay.
It's like the library taking a glass of water with a piece of poop in it, as demonstrated by my candy bar, then saying to the kids and their parents, there's only a piece of poop in it, so therefore it's still good to drink. Would anyone here drink water with poop in it? Why then would you think it's okay to give kids books with porn, however big or small?
It's an interesting argument we hear quite a bit to kind of deride the idea that, if you have this giant book, this artistic work, and there is some sort of sexual content or something that, even that little bit, what I would call that, though, is context.
Yeah.
And I would say, even for younger audiences, and I think this probably goes up to like middle school, I can't remember what age group they're talking about, but, kids can handle some content, and even then, it should be up to library officials, directly to decide what sort of things are appropriate. We've had and always have things in place to determine content. Only now with this movement are we seeing, lots of people coming out, going through books, nitpicking various lines and things like that, and saying this one line in this giant multiple 100-page book is inappropriate, so we need to ban this whole book. Not understanding that's not the role of these sort of public bodies and things like that. These are, there are people who can look into this. So that was just kind of a weird stance there. But we're glad, Josiah, that you were able to go speak on the good side there. Do you have anything else to add or about what you were talking about or what's going on with the issues there?
Let's see. That particular woman claims having formerly struggled with same-gender attraction and having once been a liberal, and that gives her. She uses that as her authorization to give her the authority to be able to speak on this. And she tends, in every set of comments, to be just as gimmicky and schlocky as that. That particular move with the candy bar and the poop thing was fairly funny, really. But there's also, some more serious things, and, on the sideline there, you could see the when I was talking, there was a woman who was kind of dressed to the nines, and who accused me of racism.
Yeah, I heard that. I was like, who is she talking about? When I was like, what?
She was talking about me.
Yeah.
And then when the other woman was speaking, in the background, you could see a guy with the indoor sunglasses on. His specific role in being at these meetings is to be the intimidator. And he always has those sunglasses on. I am about 95% certain that he is carrying And so those are just kind of the room dynamics every time you walk in there.
That's terrifying. I doubt that that's what you would expect at a library board meeting discussing library policy and things like that. That sounds terrifying, and certainly an environment that we don't want. And there's something, everything about that meeting just sounds awful. Having all those people come in and criticize the board, who's probably trying their best, to do what's right.
Majority. They do have some sympathetic members on the board of trustees.
Well, all the more terrifying.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that, and I think you've set a good example, and we should definitely encourage people to follow your example, to go in these places where boards and things are under attack from Christian nationalists coming in, interrupting meetings, and just spreading these terrible messages. We need to go and speak out truth, speak truth is power. You need to come in and help them. And then we obviously want to support, here at FFRF, we want to support people like you, local, on the ground. We do everything we can in terms of legislation, action alerts. We're writing letters, working to defend the separation of church and state, working to combat Christian nationalism. But we need local people handling it. We need to make our own sort of movement, not, to push what we believe onto people, but to fight for freedom, democracy, and everything. For more than 45 years, FFRF has been countering the dangerous myth the United States is a Christian nation, with its ancillary message that only certain kinds of Christians are true citizens. The seeds for today's Christian nationalist movement began long ago, and it's dismaying to see how much they've taken root in Idaho and elsewhere. The United States and the secular movement must stay on high alert for the continuing dangers posed by the alarming growth of this un-American theopolitical movement. And we're going to do so with people like you, Josiah, and other people on the ground. We just want to make sure everyone's out there fighting back at this at their local level. Help, go on your boards, go to board meetings, speak out for what you believe in the same way that we know Christian nationalists are going to be out there fighting for what they believe in. And if they're able to keep pushing that onto us, we're going to be in danger. And so we need to do everything we can.
And I want to add one more thing and just commend Josiah. I think that if ever we were to encourage people to get out and do what you do, I think showing them that video that we just saw is a useful tool, a great tool. I think the candor and your composure that you showed in the face of this hostility was quite impressive. So I just want to commend you on that. That was tremendous.
I think also there is probably a need within movement atheism to not be afraid to confront the racial aspects of that. So it is very specifically white Christian nationalism that we are confronting, particularly in local and in national, the legal battles that you all are so effective at engaging in. That there is a racial aspect to it, which probably also means that that we have to confront our own need to decolonialize sort of atheism, so that we are not, when we talk about praising the founding fathers, that we're not reinforcing the idea that they are any more to be worshipped than a god. Mm-hmm. Acknowledging the fact that Thomas Jefferson was an avowed racist. For all of his theoretical good work, when he was talking about freedom of religion, his understanding of what that meant was very white. Mm-hmm. And very colonial. So as much as we need to continue to fight against Christian nationalism, I think it's also necessary to name it as white Christian nationalism, because here it is about racial purity. With North Idaho's particular strong, libertarian kind of state identity, there's plenty of atheist libertarians who are just as racist as the white Christian nationalists, and how they coordinate their efforts is also interesting. One of the people that I got an indirect threat from, but very, I was right there in the room at the next meeting, which was just last week, said that if anybody wanted to call him a patriarchal white Christian nationalist, then something, a very schoolyard bully threat. So he specifically claimed that he was not representing a religion there. And I have to acknowledge the possibility that he is one of the libertarian atheists in North Idaho who is very sympathetic to racial purity causes.
Yeah, no, you bring up a good point.
It does exist. And I mean, I was thrilled at the idea of someone like Nadia Dutchin at AHA coming in with a very specific agenda of trying to decolonize atheism just as much as Christianity needs to be decolonized.
Yeah, no, you bring up a good point. It's important to recognize that, and to recognize that Christian nationalism, particularly in Idaho, from what I've read, is kind of, like you said, a convergence of things. You've got people trying to push the Christianity. You've got already before Christian nationalism came into the area, you had that, like you said, that libertarian streak, very libertarian ideology, kind of fusing with Christianity and nationalism, and there also being obviously a lot of allies there, like you said, racists, white supremacists, sometimes maybe are not completely on board with the Christianity thing, but they do want to push their ideology. So it does kind of form. It's not necessarily an exact correlate. You think there are a lot of ancillary groups with bad messages and bad things, and I agree. We need to make sure we keep that in mind as we move forward. We'll go ahead and see if we have any questions about this topic.
So Josiah, you said you continued to speak out while Chris gets these questions loaded out. You've continued to speak out at these library meetings and beyond, and has it been equally contentious, or has anything settled down at all?
The last meeting wasn't as raucous, but it was all still there, with the same guy carrying his concealed carry, the same dress to the nines, the same as Mariana Cochran, who also has started I forget what she calls her group, but they've also done petitions at the Coeur d'Alene Library downtown, which is part of a different library network to ban books. They're all still there. They're still making very, very, sometimes just some strange kinds of arguments. Like, it's just weird to witness how people think and the contortions that they go through. Like there was a guy, Luke something, who was on our side and is also a former veteran himself, which I say also because I am too, who stood up and literally read some passages from the Bible that were fairly sexually explicit. And the next person that got up to speak from their side specifically used context to defend the presence in the Bible of raping Lot's daughters, of laying down, laying Noah's daughters, laying down with him and stuff like that. So they specifically used context to defend those, but then refused to admit context in other art.
Well, you didn't explain the poop in the water thing to them. So we have the questions. We can go ahead and move. So Dan B asks, do you think Doug Wilson is a restorationist who wants to govern America by the old patriarchal rules of the Bible? I would say, yeah. I mean, I think from the clip we saw, he basically said that's what he wants. I don't know if you have any more thoughts on that, Josiah.
His specific theological base is not quite restorationist, but as he said, if it happens, he's more than willing to embrace it.
So just adjacent to that, Dwight D asks, Christian nationalists are so much louder than we are. How do we change that? I'll just say, like we said, Josiah, you went and spoke out. They were obviously hearing from a lot of Christian nationalists at that meeting. And I don't know, were there more people than you? Were you one of the few people speaking out for the other side, or was there a lot? Or
during the meeting that those clips came from, it was probably, we were a little bit outnumbered, but we still had a very strong presence. In the last meeting, there were fewer of us. Out of the 26 people or so that spoke during public comment, I think about 8 or so were from our perspective. But partially that's because we knew that there had already been a response from the places like the Idaho Tribune, which is not really a newspaper. Don't be fooled. It has a Twitter presence and a website. They are not journalists.
Okay. Yeah. So, because as I was kind of getting at, like, Christian nationalists aren't going to get any quieter. Right. That would be nice if they stopped. They're not going to. So if we want to match that, then we just have to be louder. We need to get out there and talk. I mean, we can't hope that they're going to quiet down. They're going to keep doing this. Yeah.
Yeah, and that comes from the ground up. That doesn't come from the national organizations down to the local activists. That starts with local activists getting involved, going to Board of Trustees. I mean, we have the same kind of effort going on at North Idaho College and in the public schools, trying to defend those institutions. And do a little Google on North Idaho College. But a lot of the activists that have networks that show up in defense of these public institutions, there's a lot of crossover between the people that are pushing to support school levy votes from the people that are pushing to support North Idaho College not losing its accreditation, that are pushing to support and defend libraries. And so there's a lot of coordination on there, which, of course, in an area where the more liberal push is a smaller population, that can lead to some burnout because there is such a gish gallop of laws and bills and elections that they're taking over. And part of our effort with this library group is focused on the May election, which is going to include the Board of Trustees, where they are trying to oust 2 of the more liberal. I use that very much in quotes because my idea of liberal and North Idaho's idea of liberal are very different. But their 2 seats are up. So a lot of our work is now focused on, postcard campaigns and get out the vote campaigns for this election coming up in May.
Yeah, that's important. So our final question from Myrna C. Is there a way to stop the media from spreading the message of white Christian nationalism? Because that is sort of kind of what I got into in the last one. We can combat it. We can't control what the media is saying. We can we can give the media messages, the correct messages, to say we can help shine a light on that. Like what we're doing here. I saw that article about you, Josiah. That's why I thought this would make a good topic for an Ask an Atheist episode to help. That's what we want to do. We want to take local activists who are doing the work on the ground, and we want to help shine a light on them and help them and do everything we can, because I'm not sure that we have any control over the media. There's not really anything we can do about that.
No, I agree with you there, and I think it goes back to just being loudest. And I, to the earlier points that were made, or the earlier question is, we're not outnumbered, right? I think we are we're quieted down because the Christian nationalists feel empowered by all these things that are happening. And people like Josiah will empower our side as well. So once, like Josiah said, it starts from the ground up. It doesn't start from top down. But once we're empowered, that's how we make our voices heard.
Well, so thank you, Josiah, for joining us. That concludes Ask an Atheist for this week. This week on our broadcast TV show, Free Thought Matters, our guest is Joy Barry, a prolific author with more than 85 million books sold and a former co-worker with FFRF's co-president, Dan Barker. Here's a preview.
I developed a survey where we would talk to children who were claimed to be Christians. We would ask them a series of questions, and here's how it would go. Are you a Christian? They would say yes. what does it mean to be a Christian? They would usually say, it means take Jesus Christ as your personal Savior. We would say, well, what does that mean? And they would say, it means to take Jesus Christ into your heart. And then we would ask, what does that mean? And that's where they would kind of stop and think and go, I'm not sure. I've always wondered how, like, they'd say things like, I always wondered, you know, how did he get in there and how can he breathe and all of that kind of stuff.
You can see Free Thought Matters on TV stations all across the U.S. and also on FFRF's Facebook and YouTube channels.
And don't miss Free Thought Radio. This week, Dan and Annie Laurie will talk to Brad Onishi, author of Preparing for War, the extremist history of white Christian nationalism and what comes next. You can find out how to hear Free Thought Radio at ffrf.org/radio.
If you want more information about the Freedom from Religion Foundation, check out our website at ffrf.org. If you're a member already, thank you. If not, please join us, and we will see you next week on FFRF's Ask an Atheist.